Welcome to What Happens Next, the channel and interview series where we explore the challenges we often face when we get to our 50s, 60s and beyond, and we're thinking about what happens next in our lives. Now, I'm really pleased today to have David Scarlet on, and I've known David, funny enough, before we met, I'd read a couple of your books, David, and it was only quite recently that we've started to build this really great relationship. And I thought, if there's one man who can give insight to our audience about coping with change, thinking about life's transitions, and looking at what we should consider when we're thinking about the next chapter of our lives, it's a man like you. So thank you for joining us on the show.
Thanks for the invitation, Chris. And yeah, we've developed this relationship, haven't we? We spend most of our time laughing. I'm not quite sure how that happens.
And why not? And why not? And I've heard, like you were telling me about, what I've been thinking about quite a lot, and actually a point that you made was really interesting when we was chatting before. You were telling me about your holiday to Cyprus, and I've been thinking about the quality of our relationships having such a huge factor to the quality of our lives. And in fact, even though we spend a lot of time talking about the money, actually the relationships are the thing that contributes so positively to how we feel about the world. And I know your trip to Cyprus is with two other couples, and you and Wendy. And tell me a little bit about how you see those sort of long-lasting relationships and the impact they've had on your life.
Yeah, so just from a personal perspective, Wendy and I, with these two other couples, they call us the Gang of Six, and the back phrase to that is "you don't mess with the Gang of Six."
Okay.
Four very strong characters, and we have found that we're quite comfortable saying to each other that I love you, and we've all agreed that the quality of this relationship, this intense compassion and tenderness for each other, such that we trust each other implicitly. We go on holidays for the last 14 years, and we teach each other this is how life works best. So it's made a great deal of difference to Wendy and I emotionally and spiritually. But also, I was watching a really interesting BBC program recently, Chris, about the brain. Just I think 2 or 3 parts episodes in that series. And a comment stood out for me from one of the scientists discussing the brain, that our longevity is directly correlated to the quality of our relationships.
Yeah.
Starting with our closest and then going to acquaintances and so on and so forth. So, yeah, these relationships for me are critical to emotional well-being,
100%.
Physical well-being, and spiritual well-being. So, yeah, it's a big thing for us, these deep relationships.
And that research, so the research I love on this particular topic is from a brilliant book called The Good Life by a guy who is head of the Harvard Study of Wellbeing. And the Harvard Study of Wellbeing followed the same individuals and their kids and their grandkids through the last 80 years. It's the longest study that's ever occurred on well-being and happiness. And that was the thing that he always came back to. The quality of our relationships are determined by, the quality of our lives are determined by the quality of our relationships. And I absolutely love that. For I know who you are, and I'm really pleased that you're coming on to have a conversation with me today. But for those in our audience who don't know about you, tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, well, I, as you well know, I'm past my 50s and even my 60s, and so I'm definitely in this last quarter of life. I'm loving it, loving it. And you get to this stage, Chris, where you think, why didn't I do this before? Why didn't I know this stuff before? And why didn't I act more selflessly before? Because it just brings great joy in your life. So I come from Jamaica originally. Came over here when I was 4 with the Windrush era parents, and grew up mainly in a children's home. That's quite normal for West Indian families. They would, put their children in boarding school or children's home, and then save up to bring the other children over. So they never came all together. Couldn't afford that. So 7 years in a children's home, and that influenced my life. It was run by a convent of nuns, really strong, powerful women, but also incredibly tender and loving and compassionate. So I learned a great deal about life and about emotions and spiritual well-being and mental well-being from these very bright. Okay, just lost the recording for a second there.
Right. So you were telling me you were talking about the fact that you were brought up with nuns looking after.
Yes.
Just a bit about the nuns.
So that did shape my life an awful lot into the future. So 7 years there, 7 years as a teenager till I was 21, and then another 7 years married. So everything's in 7. Very, very young, too young. Learned an awful lot about selfishness and selflessness and how it's easy to just destroy a life, your own life and others, just by being purely selfish. So I learned some deep, bitter lessons there that then influenced how I behaved after that. Literally picked up out of the gutter by some dear friends, took pity on me, and just brought me under their wings. And that introduced me to my current church membership. I've actually became an ordained priest within that church membership, and now I'm an ordained minister, and I love working with people of all ages, youth, primary children, people far more capable and intelligent than I am, but they come to me to be ministered to and to be helped and healed. So that's the background to my life. Professionally, started life in the IT sector. It was called computing then, not IT, computing. So grew up there, moved into computer recruitment, and eventually landed somehow into financial services. And then spent 20 years as a financial advisor, then a fee-based financial planner, where I actually began to get what this profession was all about. It's not about selling products and pensions and investments. It really is about helping people to shape their life using money as a tool and as a support, but to shape their life in the way they wanted to live and to be known and to become. So I think all of that has been shaped by my life, living really at one time on the streets, turning my life around, becoming driven by service. How can I serve others, lift their lives, elevate them, bless them, help them heal themselves? And then that's just influenced everything I've done since then. So that's kind of a background journey from Jamaica to East Grinstead in West Sussex.
Oh, I love that. You know what I found interesting about that answer is how it started, right? Because you just said at the start of this conversation, I've recently realised and started to wonder, why didn't I do that before? And why didn't I know that before? What do you reckon you've most recently known and do that's changed your perspective?
Yeah, I think going back a little bit to beyond recent, to say 20 years ago, I began to understand that wealth has little to do with money. Clearly, money is important. It's a tool and a driver for a lot of our activity and our well-being and our pleasure and our joy. But what I realized was some years ago, why don't we just turn this wealth thing on its head? How about becoming really wealthy in the quality of our relationships, number one? Secondly, Chris, in the way we influence and impact other people's lives.
Yeah.
Why don't we live wealthily in that sense? I think the man, here's what I've discovered, and some people may not see this or agree with it. The man or woman, the person that selflessly tries to influence others for good is by far, in the long term, happier.
Yeah.
And leaves this earth just a much happier being. When I first started working as a coach, I would ask people like yourself, financial planners, leaders. So here you are, you're 83 years old, and you walk into this churchyard and you see there's about 100 people gathering around the door of the church, and you walk in and everybody stands up. You walk down the aisle and you see there's a coffin there, and you walk down the aisle and nobody's bothering you, nobody's stopping you, and you think, this is strange. And you lean over into the coffin and it's you. And then I ask them, there are 3 people going to stand up and talk about you. Maybe a child, maybe your spouse, maybe somebody you met in business or in the community. What would you have them say about you and your life?
Question.
And that question has caused many, many people I've met, particularly in your role, completely change the way they think about the business, the way the business influences their clients, and about money and how they use money and how they ask their clients to consider using money in their lives. It's just, and that reshape happening in front of me is a really exciting experience to be part of.
100%. I mean, I think my journey with that started when, in my late 30s, when I started on the road of writing my last book, the book that I wrote about kindness. And it was that element where I was meeting people who financially weren't as secure as they potentially could have been, but were over the moon because of the contributions they made to others. And the best example, I mean, it's so funny. I mean, I'll tell you this story. So there was one lady, and I picked up the paper one day, or I'd read it on Facebook or something, about this, excuse me, about this woman who lived about 30 minutes away from me. And what she'd done is she'd had a stage 3 cancer diagnosis in her mid-30s. And she'd had this cancer diagnosis, and she decided that, and actually had chemo, had all of the medical interventions, recovered. But the fact that she'd gone through this potentially life-ending illness, she said, well, actually, my perspective on life is aimed towards helping others now, and I'd like to do that a bit more. So she did this really interesting thing. She was a woman that always loved Christmas, even more than my family, David. And they love Christmas so much, the decorations are going up now at the start of November. But she loved Christmas. So she decided that she was going to fundraise, raise a bunch of money, and deliver a Christmas present to every child in a child's hospice in the UK. So that was her mission. And she did it at the age of 38, dressed as an elf. So she literally started at the start of December and went, and I got in touch with her, found her online and said, look, we need to have a conversation because I need to learn about your overcoming the adversity, but how that adversity changed your perspective. And some of the kids she met had terminal illnesses because she was going to these children's hospices, but she said the look on their faces she'll never forget. And I actually think that when I'm talking to people like that, I did that for 8 years. We interview people from all across the world who had kindness at the core of what they do. It really changed my perspective on what success means. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because you look online and you think the people we tend to elevate as people in society are the wealthiest from a financial perspective, but maybe not from a perspective where I'd want to live their life. What can we do to have better conversations about what true wealth is?
Yeah. I think it's to have the conversations in the first place. What often happens is, particularly in the UK culture, we're kind of embarrassed talking about our money. We talk about money in the academic, in the theory, in the esoteric, but our money tends to be, we keep it close to our chest. It's just not culturally acceptable right now. I think starting with our children, being role models for our children, showing them, look, this is what happiness looks like. This is what happy behavior looks like, where, yes, you might be tired. Yes, you may think, actually, I can't be bothered with this. I've had a really rough day at work, so I don't want to go out and see somebody who desperately needs some help. But my goodness, when you've left that home or wherever you're visiting, you are literally walking on air. I mean, it's just a fabulous feeling. To me, when you experience that kind of wealth, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, even physical wealth, you realize, oh my goodness, having sufficient money is great to enjoy some of the luxuries in life, but knowing when to stop and knowing. So here's something that challenges a number of my colleagues, associates, and clients: not knowing when enough is enough.
Yeah, how much is enough, right? Yeah.
When you know when enough is enough, it's just a great burden lifted from your shoulders, where you're not driving yourself ruthlessly to gather more, whatever. You just don't need it, and then life becomes freer, and you can afford to then say, what does a wealthy life look like for me and the people I influence? So, the name of my brand is called the Soul Millionaire or Soul Millionaire. People say, what's all that about? It's actually my wife's invention. I thought, what a stupid name that is when she first mentioned it. What do you know about my business? You're just, and she gave me a good looking at. She said, just use the name. I said, well, why? She said, because you love operating on people's souls. That's their whole life, and their emotions and their intellect, and helping them elevate themselves to just be more joyful and at peace. And you'd love to touch or impact a lot of people before, during, and after your own life, after you're gone. So that influence, you'd like to actually touch 1 million people. I heard you say it one day. That's the million bit. The souls is the number of people, the type of people you're touching. You're touching their souls. You're working with them, Chris, at a level deeper than just their stuff.
Yeah.
That's where the term Soul Millionaire came from. I did think she was bonkers saying that, and I did tell her that. So we had an argument about it until I stepped on stage, and she saw me being introduced as Dave Scarlet, the Soul Millionaire. So there you go, told you so.
We need to learn to listen to our wives more, don't we? They're normally right.
But don't tell her that.
I'm going to intentionally share this video with her so she gets the great. And I love that. You know what? The other interesting thing you mentioned. I want to talk about this because I had a conversation with a client of mine earlier this week, and we were talking about what happens next, and they've achieved their number. They know that they're financially independent enough to do what they want, but they're wondering what the next shape of their lives can look like in terms of how they spend their time. And I was talking to them about mentoring and becoming a mentor, because certainly for a lot of people I've spoken to, that is a really rewarding component part of their lives. Now, I know you mentor through the work you do with your church. Help me understand a little bit about that and what you get personally from it, but also a story that illustrates the power of mentoring from both your perspective, but the perspective of the mentee.
So if I touch upon church and then bring that back into business, if that's okay, that journey. So I learned about mentoring, coaching in religious context. We call it ministering, because it's very much about going very deep and understanding the tenderness of life. There's a song within a hymn, Chris, and there's a tiny line in that hymn that haunts me. And whether you're religious or not, it's not relevant. But the line sounds like this: "In the quiet heart is hidden sorrow that the eye can't see." That, every time I look at a human being, I think, "Oh, you're doing pretty well for yourself then. You've got this house, this car," and I realise, no, in that quiet heart is hidden sorrow I can't see until I start to get close to them and ask them questions where they happily reveal what's really going on in their life. And that's where friendship starts. So that's what coaching or ministering does within a spiritual context. Bring that into business. And so I tend, I get the concept of mentoring because it is very exciting to say to someone who is new to something, where you're old to something and you've experienced, and share with them all that you've learned over 20 years and save them 20 years of grief. But that's an exciting process. The challenge with mentoring, and it's a great feeling, and it brings people up, particularly youth, young graduates, bright young things, brings them up to a level where they don't waste their time making exactly the same mistakes that they don't need to make. Somebody said to me when I first joined this industry, you really don't need to jump off a cliff to know that it hurts. Clearly you learn by experience and pain, but not all of it is valuable.
Sure.
So that's mentoring. The challenge with mentoring, Chris, is it takes very much a parent-child relationship to mentor. I know stuff you don't. I teach you stuff. What coaching does is it takes two individuals, whatever age, and it makes them equal, and it makes them parent to parent or child to child. And that takes a different skill set. What happens there is you start to recognize the person sitting in front of me on screen or actually in the room is actually blooming brilliant. You've got an 86 billion neuron brain firing in front of you. Inside that brain is genius, but also knowledge and wisdom. And what often happens is they have experiences which maybe hurt them or frustrate them along their journey, and they start to close down on that wisdom. They're frightened of taking a decision or making a risk. And your job then in ministering and in coaching is, no, I think you probably got an answer in there. My job is to ask the right question that draws out that answer. I met with a guy called Ashley recently, bright young guy, met him 6 years ago, and he said, I'm just not ready for this.
So at the minute, I'm spending a lot of time writing the What Happens Next book. I'm 50,000 words in as I speak to you today, and currently working to make sure that the book adds as much value as we can to people thinking about that next stage in their lives. Now, the book's not ready yet. It won't be out until sometime in 2025. I'm working hard to get it finished. But what you can do is sign up for the book waiting list. So you're one of the first people that gets access. You can simply do that by visiting whathappensnext.life/book. Join the waiting list today, and you'll be one of the first person to get access to the book and some extra goodies when it comes out.
He now has, taken off in as a financial planner, really earning seriously good revenue and money, and has a baby which has changed his life, made him more selfless. And he came to visit with me at Ashdown Park in East Sussex, and he spent a morning with me. And he said, "You've done it again. How do you do this?" I said, "Well, do what? What have I done?" He said, "You've said nothing for 3.5 hours." I think you said nothing. And yet on the board, on this flip chart, with flip chart pages all over the wall, are the most genius ideas I've ever had in my life. How the heck do you do that? And and it's a great skill to learn, and it's lovely to see it happen. So I don't do it to people, but I'm doing something to help them do it for themselves, knowing that something has taken me 10 years to learn. So,
Yeah.
but the magic is the genius comes out of the human being, and that you see it.
I love that. I love that clear difference between mentoring and coaching. I think both play a part in our journeys through being a mentor, a coach, but also the recipient of both. Here's the interesting insight I've had when I've been coached is, and I know that one of the books that you really like, that I'd like to talk about is it Nancy Klein's Time to Think? My experience with my coaching journey is often I don't give myself the time to think apart from when I'm in that coaching environment. And that coaching environment is often just the time, independent of all of the other relationships that I've got, to give me time to actually think about what I want. Now, I do that in a couple of ways, interestingly, David. I journal, and that's my time to think, but that coaching experience, and actually having a coach that says little but asks really pertinent questions is really powerful, right?
Yeah, it's I'm really glad at this stage of my life. Like you, I wish I'd discovered this earlier. I would have been a better parent to my children, as opposed to, Dad, you're being so patronising, which clearly I have done. I would have been a better husband to Wendy. I remember Wendy saying to me one day she was feeling very ill, and so Wendy's my wife, the one who knows everything, and and you don't want to play games against Wendy; you'll always lose. But she's always right.
You are describing Cassie as well right now. I mean, like,
don't play Uno or Scrabble with.
What's the game she's most competitive with?
She thrashes me at Scrabble. She thrashes me at every card game I've ever played with her in 45 years. I've never won once. I don't know if she does that. But one day she was really not feeling well, feeling very, very low, having been ill for a number of weeks. And she started explaining some problems that she was wrestling with within her extended family. And I made a couple of comments. And she said, will you just stop doing that? Well, doing what? I'm sitting with you, being with you. No, you're trying to fix me.
Yeah.
I just want you to listen to me. And there's the difference.
Yeah.
And the challenge with many of our peers, as you know, Chris, in the financial advisory sector, is they're taught to fix. That's what they think the job is. And they fix too quickly. And those that have learned to listen far more and allow the client, this wonderful human being, to be fully heard, possibly for the first time in their whole life, to be really heard, they change the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly learned that, but I'm still a 1,000,000% work in progress in trying to implement that in my own life, both personally and professionally. How do we get slightly better at listening more?
Yeah.
How do we get better at it?
I wish my children had been able to articulate that in their teenage years. You know, when we all get really stroppy and independent and rude and all that good stuff. So I did that to my parents, and my children done it to me, all 5 children. So it's been a heck of a journey. But I just wish that they'd learned to be able to articulate, Dad, I just need you to listen to me while I try and work this thing out, my life.
Yeah.
And so, I have regrets, but I'm awfully glad I'm still alive. You know, I'm beyond my 50s and 60s. I'm learning this, and it's magical when applied to our personal relationships.
So heading back to the book, what did you, because I know that when you do your coaching with your clients, you talk about this time to think. When you learned about that, way to coach to create that space? What was the big factor that you thought, you know what, that's a really powerful thing?
I think the first step was disbelief.
Yeah.
It can't be that simple just to listen, for goodness sake. I listen, we all listen all the time. We've got ears, we listen, don't we? And then I learned by trying to implement it and making a real mess of listening, that actually we collectively, Homo sapiens, us, these really incredible species that we are, don't actually listen very well at all. What we tend to do, I found when I first started to implement time to think, is we listen just so that we can wait for their breathing to stop while they take a breath, and then we're in there with our next idea. And I realized, oh, that's not actually listening. Listening is when you're eagerly, almost obsessively fascinated by where their thinking is going to go next, not where your thinking is, but and stopping your. Dr. Maria Nemeth, psychologist, she said, try and stop the monkey chatter in your brain because it goes all the time, doesn't it? In our and everywhere else. You stop that monkey chatter, be fascinated by where their thinking is going. You'll begin to see this human being becoming cleverer, more clear in their thinking, more courageous in their thinking, and more creative in their thinking. Those three things happening in front of you, Chris, it's honestly, it's almost like being bathed in something good. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I love that. You know what I often think about? I think about the traits that I try to develop in my own life, and particularly the traits that are going to be useful for me today, but are going to be useful for me in the future. And I think curiosity is the one that I'm most proud of, because I think having that trait where I'm always trying to understand, learn, and evolve more, then allows me to share some of those ideas, but also ask questions that provide me with insight. And what I'm curious about is the questions that you ask, and in particular, the one question you ask that gives you real insight when somebody's thinking about the next chapter of their lives on where to go. What if somebody came to you and said, I'm at this crossroads, I don't know where to go, help me understand what I might want to ask myself to understand the next stage? What would you ask to get a deeper insight?
Often I used to be tempted to try and shape that thinking for them. I used to be sitting there thinking, I know where you need to go. If you could just do this, honestly, it would all open up to you. And that's where I used to start. Now I step back, even if they come to me confused and flummoxed and just ready to babble. They apologize to me when they start talking and they say, I'm sorry, I'm waffling. And here's what I've discovered, Chris. The waffling and the babbling is the good part. In all that stuff are nuggets of gold. And so what I do is I step back and ask something which is almost counterintuitive. What do you want to think about today? And what are your first thoughts? And then they just go blah.
Yeah.
And then they suddenly dry up, and you see it happening in front of you, and they say, "Yeah, that's it." And I look at you, Chris Daems, and I look at the things you have done with your life and with your family, and I look at how much life you've lived. And if you say to me, "That's it," I'm thinking, "That's never it." There's about, there are a million hours behind you, behind those glasses. There is this colossal life. That's never it. And so I ask the next question, and it's really simple, but it's actually framed very carefully. And what more do you think or feel or want to say? Now, you know as well as I do that we men, we don't do the feel bit very well. we talk about, I want to do this, I want that to happen, I want that goal to be achieved. Blah. No, that's not what I asked you. What more do you think or feel or want to say right now? I was with Austin, Austin pretty well.
Yeah.
And just keeping that bit slightly confidential, a number of years ago. And we started with breakfast, and then we went on coaching. We had lunch, and we went on coaching. In 6 hours, Austin's told me that I asked him 6 questions. And he wrote at least 20 pages longhand of A4 notepad with ideas. And the only question I really asked him was, wow, that's amazing. And what more do you think, Austin, or feel or want to say? And it was off on one. What I realized was, and time to think teaches you about this, but you don't actually believe it until it happens in front of you. Our energy, brain energy, goes in great peaks and then drops into a trough where it just dries up for a bit. If you just lift it and prod it a little bit with a simple question, what more do you think? It gives it the permission to go up on another peak again. It's like thinking. And that can happen literally for hours. Now imagine you're with a friend or a client or a loved one, and you just sit there, you're lounging together, whether it's in a pub or in a sitting room or in a business meeting. You say, that's amazing. And what more do you think or feel or just want to say? And it's almost like you're giving them permission to go to dig it further into their 50 years of wisdom and pour stuff out, and including the pain and the frustration, the heartache. And here's what I found is that if you just hold yourself back and allow them to do that, they start to lay all the problems out in front of themselves, kind of between you on a table. And they start to work it out for themselves. They can see how some of the decisions are really not helpful to them or anybody else. And they start to see it and they start to question it and poke it. I was on a coaching call this morning for 2 hours with Gary, and he said, I can see that's a rubbish email I'm writing to the client. What rubbish? How can I possibly say that to somebody who opened their heart and mind to me over a 3-hour meeting? What nonsense is that?
Yeah.
But so that's the magic of that journey, which can be applied, as you say, to both personal and. So the first question I ask is that. An alternative to that is, and Ashley did this the other day for the first time in his life. He said to an existing client, what would make this an exceptionally good meeting for you today? And the client went off on one about very private things. And Ashley said, I've known this guy for 5 years. He never told me any of this until I asked him that question. What would make this an exceptionally good conversation for you today?
Yeah, interesting. So interesting. Because to me, I mean, the more that I continue to do this work, but also build deeper relationships with my clients, but also in my life, I think there's all, like, particularly, it's really interesting when I look at the life of a chart financial planner, and I've never met a financial planner who is just a financial planner. We've all got these like sort of layers that go super deep. But I look at the work we do, and I think actually often the conversations we're lucky enough to have are nothing to do with the money. They're to do with happiness. They're to do with well-being. They're to do with a life well lived. They're to do with how somebody would ideally spend their time if money was no object. And that's a completely different conversation to just talking about pensions or ISAs or investments or whatever people superficially think they need to have an initial conversation about. Here's the interesting thing. When I'm doing as I said to you earlier before we started, I'm literally just finished the book, the What Happens Next book. But what we've done is said, actually, well-being is so much more than the money, so much more than financial well-being. Factors do you think about when you're thinking about your own well-being, but also with the work you do with your clients? And what often do we ignore when it comes to well-being that we should do have a little more focus on?
Okay, I think I've got that question. So I do try and ask whoever I'm working with, if that's a leader of financial planning business, about their life, as opposed to just their client work.
Yeah.
And try and get them to, by asking some simple questions, try and get them to lay out what exactly makes you happy, what helps you to feel happy and feel that what you're living is meaningful.
Yeah.
At home, in the community, close friendships, in our work, with our team, Chris, with our team members who are constantly supporting us. And then all of that directed towards each client that we meet privately. What causes you to be happy?
Do you think happy and meaningful are two separate entities?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, and this is kind of a paradox. What I find sometimes is we do get involved in meaningful activities in our personal life or in our business life, which is really just part of our personal life. And often we realize being meaningful can be really hard work. I mean, gruelingly hard work, and requires persistence and resilience to live a meaningful life. I mean, I look at people like Martin Luther King and the big heroes of our growing up from the 60s onwards, and they never had an easy life. Nobody said anything about being comfortable.
Yeah, true.
Meaningful does not mean comfortable. So that's one side. And recognizing that whilst that hardship and that grueling and that effort to lift other people may exhaust you, but it also ultimately allows you to realize, actually, I'm happier than most other human beings by doing this.
Yeah.
I just go to bed feeling, what an amazing life this is.
I love that. I love that ancient Greek definition of well-being, where they talk about the three factors. So the hedonism, just having fun with the people you love and like, just doing. For me, it's really bad dancing, David. I was at a friend's 50th party and literally clearing the dance floor with how bad my dancing was. I was having a great time. I was loving it, but everybody else, I'm not so sure. So hedonism is one. It's that element of, how do we just really enjoy ourselves? And then you've got the meaning and purpose, the eudaimonism, the Greeks used to call it. How do we find meaning and purpose in our lives? And often when people are coming to us, they're transitioning through a stage where work, when their kids were younger, the work they're doing when their kids were younger used to give them meaning because their meaning came from providing for the kids. Yes. And now they've got a bit older, that definition of meaning and purpose is changing. So that's a really interesting one. And then the other element is charonic well-being. So what gives us awe? Now, for a lot of people who are religious, the community and the belief in God can give you awe, but there's other people who get it from nature. And I'd one What Happens Next interview where the guy had said that he gets awe from being at a dance concert and just looking at the people he's surrounded with all having a great time, and he gets awe from that. So I love that element of thinking about well-being, not only from just fun, but also from finding meaning. Here's the bit that I think I find myself with a bit more of a challenge. I love the fact that you've mentioned Martin Luther King and that aspirational meaning that he gave to our lives. Now, with the best will in the world, you and I are not Martin Luther King. But what I think is interesting is hopefully we have a positive impact on people's lives. Do you think that people think meaning is a grand ambition out of reach? And how do we actually make it more real for you, people like you and me?
What a great question that is. I sense that you're right. My sense is, we may be wrong, but I sense you're right that meaning, using the English language, has this grandiose effect on us. You know, we see somebody like Luther King and we think, oh, I'm not going to live that kind of life.
Yeah.
I can't do that. And so it takes on a weighty matter of thought for us. And so I think we need to be better at communicating this mixture of, in Cyprus, we laughed a lot. I mean, we just were really stupid. We were like little silly children. And we've all got, between us, we've got 24 grandchildren, okay? So we've lived a bit.
Yeah.
But if you saw us, Chris and I, so there's Chris, David and myself, and then there's Wendy, Leslie and Rashida. Chris and I are not actually allowed to be together because he sets me off on one. He just winds me up and we start giggling and laughing like two little schoolboys. So there's this wonderful feeling of fun. But we know that and that laughter has a great healing effect, doesn't it? I mean, it just physically floods you with oxytocin and dopamine, and we're designed to do that. But that laughter for us comes within a context of, and when we stop messing about, okay, is our life generally, are we making other people happy and laugh? Do they? I teach primary children every other Sunday, and in between that, the other Sundays, I teach teenagers. Now, teenagers, you know, they're stroppy, they're independent, they can be real challenges, as do bright primary children. And they are scary bright, Chris. Oh, they frighten the life out of me. They're so bright. But our responsibility, Wendy and I have decided when we teach these age group, is how much laughter can we introduce into the room, so that when they leave, they think this religious stuff is all about just enjoying life.
Enjoying it. Yeah.
They laugh, and we get them to laugh. We get them to make fun of themselves and just make fun of life.
Yeah.
And that's something I learned as a minister and as a teacher.
But that's really interesting. I think that's something. Like, if I look at that, I'm not religious, but I love philosophy and I think about it quite a lot. I think for me that starts with that element of humility. You know, it's not that serious, is it? You know, let's enjoy it. Let's understand that taking yourself too seriously means that you enjoy it less, and let's try and it creates a sense of perspective, doesn't it? You know, yeah. we are here to enjoy it, and I know that I've met people in our world who are superficially successful but don't look like they're enjoying the journey.
No,
and I want to do this. I want to enjoy the journey regardless of what the numbers says.
Yes.
Thankfully, the numbers are right, but it wouldn't. I think in part it's because I've enjoyed the journey, and I think those two things go hand in hand. And I'd rather get there just enjoying not every day. You know, there's challenges throughout our lives, but enjoying it is more important to me. How about you?
Yeah, and taking that to the people who come to us in whatever guise, you know, as clients or team members or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, our spouses, our children. One of the questions I ask myself sometimes when I go home from I'm sitting in what the children call my international shed quarters at the bottom of my garden right now. So this is one of my offices. And I go home and one of my children challenged me, Dad, whatever you're doing in that shed quarters, okay, I'm not sure it's made you happy today. So what was the point of that? Yeah. And so I asked myself the question, are the people with me today able to laugh about something? Can I move them towards that? I was with Andy yesterday morning, and the problem with Andy, who's a managing director of a growing firm, and Carrie Bendel of the Personal Finance Society. The problem with Andy, Carrie, and myself is when we get together, we can't be serious. We just end up bursting into fits of laughter. There was one meeting we had for 10 minutes. We could not speak, either of us, because we were laughing so much. And then we stopped, and that laughter almost turned to tears, because the tears were saying to us, do you know what? In all that we do, let's just stop taking ourselves so seriously. Let's take our responsibility of service seriously.
100%.
But us, we're just sometimes very soppy human beings. So let's just laugh and
embrace it.
Yeah,
I love it. And you definitely do that if you saw me dancing. I mean, that is a sign of just a man, who's clearly got no control of any of his limbs, and they're all going in opposite directions. What I love when we always have a conversation is, and it's something that we talk about quite a lot on What Happens Next, is I just feel this sense of community from you. You're all about the communities you're part of, the communities you built, but also the communities that you find yourself part of. Help me understand why community is so important to you. And the reason I ask this is that there's a great book on the subject called, because I think I'm quite a big community person, there's a great book on this subject called Bowling Alone. And it's about the decline of communities, particularly in America, over the past 50 years. We just don't join clubs anymore, be it bowling clubs, church. We don't typically join these communities because we've made that move more, particularly in America and the UK, from a collective society to a bit more of an individualistic one. I think to our detriment, if I'm being perfectly honest. So why is community so important for you? And if we're spent our careers a bit more individualistic, and we've got more time on our hands when we are in our 50s and 60s, why is community so important in that stage of our lives, do you think?
I'm speaking from experience now, so just my own life experience, and what it's shown me is it was community that brought me out of tragedy in my 20s. Literally, where I was lucky that I was alive at all. It was community that did that. It was community that helped to shape to just erase some of the selfishness within me so that I could then have something to give. It was community. It's community nowadays that, you know what? I'm not sure how people get by each week without an injection of community. So I go to church, and sometimes I've had a really rough week and everything's gone totally wrong. You think, I'm obviously an idiot. I'm obviously useless at what I do. I'm obviously useless at relationships. I go to church and I'm lifted up by men who come up and hug me and just look at me. And we ask each other the question, how are you? We don't actually mean that, because everybody says, I'm all right. Even if your life is falling apart, you say, I'm all right. And they look at me and they say, how are you? I say, Chris, I'm fine. No, Dave, how are you really?
Yeah.
And Chris puts his arm around me. We go for a stroll down the corridor, pop outside and just take a 5-minute walk. So it's that kind of community. The other thing I think about community is that we are physically wired from a chemical point of view, that when we're in community, in touch with each other, like you and I are in BIP, the design of our systems is that oxytocin starts flooding into our system. Oxytocin is a survival mechanism, survival chemical that keeps us strong and alive and alert and bright-eyed and alive, genuinely alive as opposed to just existing. So I think we're physically designed for community. We're mentally better at community. The story you told about the lady who wanted to give back in spite of the fact that she had cancer, that took community to do that, to make that happen. I remember reading a quote by Mary, I can't remember her surname, but it says something like, it tends to be a small group of citizens who bring about great change in the world. In fact, it's usually only a small group of citizens that bring about great change in the world. But without that group forming and gelling, change just doesn't come about. And so in terms of our life longevity, I was watching a natural history program this morning, David Attenborough again, about cats and hyenas and stuff in Africa. And it said, the wild dog of Africa's superpower is unity of community. No animal, including elephants, can challenge the wild dog of Africa because they are brilliant at coming together as a community and fighting off any threat. And so in terms of love, in terms of longevity of life, in terms of our superpowers, in terms of the influence we leave behind in this world, community is a big issue for me. It works best in a community.
I think the interesting thing is that self-made man or woman narrative, isn't it? And I like that. Arnold Schwarzenegger quote where he says, "Never ever call me a self-made man," because actually the amount of people I've had to rely on, trust, build relationships with, and supported me through my journey in life, it disrespects the positive impact they've had on my life, and I think that's absolutely right. I want to make sure that our conversation today has a real positive impact to the people who watch it, David. So if somebody's in their 50s and 60s looking at their lives and going, is this it? I think there's more to my life moving forward. What couple of questions, 2 or 3 questions, would you ask them to ask of themselves to help them get closer to the life they want?
So short-term one would be thinking back over the last, say, decade of your life. In your quiet moments, what has brought you the greatest joy? What has brought you the greatest joy? And that could include pleasure and fun, but deeper than that, what after the event is over and it's all died down, that the dancing has stopped.
Thankfully for most people,
and the crowd has reeled back from the impact of the dance.
The word is recovered.
What is it you're carrying from some experience in the past that when you think about it still brings you enormous joy?
Part of the issue we've got when we're thinking about what happens next in our lives is having the self-awareness, having the introspection to be able to think about what the gaps in our well-being are. And we're doing loads of work at the minute with what happens next to build solutions that are going to help you think about well-being in a nuanced way when you're thinking about how it applies to your life. One of the first things we've built that you can use today is our What Happens Next quiz. It's free to do, takes about 5 minutes, but what it will do is give you an insight into the areas of strengths when it comes to your well-being and the areas you might want to improve. You can take the What Happens Next quiz at whathappensnext.life/quiz, and I hope it helps you in your journey to work out what happens next for you.